the power that we have. Sometimes when we are in one country, the power dynamic is not the same as when we move from that country to a different country. And I think a lot of times people forget that just because I was a minority here and I experienced racism, um, then when I go to another country, I still have the same or I still experience the same kind of violence, and I completely um, cannot also reproduce other kinds of violence. I think I think we need to start our reflection from there, and then we can talk about allyship and how it looks like, you know, because also obviously Ghanaian queer people cannot prevent those in the diaspora to have an experience, to have a cultural experience.
Welcome back, everyone. This is another episode of Grill of the Diaspora. I'm your host, Nakaira G, and today we have a new guest, and we are going to be talking about queerness in Ghana. Most of you know that there have been different anti-LGBTQ laws that have been going on across the continent, and so we are going to hear from a Ghanaian, and they are going to share with us the history and some information that we need to know, especially for those of us in the diaspora. So please meet Owl. Owl, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, Owl, do you speak Tree?
Yes, I do actually.
Okay, okay.
I was born in Ghana.
So yeah, so are you Ashanti?
Yeah, my mom is Ashanti, my dad is Achim. So I am really I just like to describe myself as an Akan.
Yes. Okay, okay, cool. Okay, cool. Yeah, Mikasa Tree Kakra Kakra. So I'm still learning, but hopefully I get better over the years. So we're going to be talking a little bit about um, Owl's work. Owl has a project called Queerness or Documenting Queerness. And I want to learn a lot more about that. And we'll be also talking about um, President Mahama with the recent anti-LGBTQ bill that we are all still waiting to see if it's going to pass. But we know that there have been some bills that have passed on the continent. So we will be talking about that a little bit later. But to start, Owl, can you please let us know how did you start documenting queerness and what was the inspiration behind that?
Hmm. I started working on documenting queerness in I think 2022, or at least the very early 2023. And it was from a very personal place. And also from time I had been working as an LGBT rights activist in Ghana. And I had been, working with an organization that we were consistently documenting human rights abuses and violence and trauma. And I think at a point it started really triggering me and also bothering me that, like, for instance, when you search for queerness in Ghana or even LGBT in Ghana, like on Google, the first 20 pages are all related to violence and abuse and homophobia. And for me, it was very concerning because I also did feel like the lives of queer people were much more broader, and our experiences were much wider than that. So I think in 2023, the beginning of 2023, I started documenting queerness. The very first initiative I started under documenting queerness. So the very first series that I did under documenting queerness, I traveled around Ghana. I interviewed an 83-year-old trans woman, spoke to a lesbian couple that had been together for like 30 years. And along the line, when I started sharing the stories, it I had a producer who got very interested in it, and it's currently in post production for a podcast on queer elders in Ghana. Apart from that, I also try to I explain documenting queerness as the documenting of every other aspect of queerness that's does not necessarily center violence, center abuse, because it's very easy for the lives and for the stories of queerness and queer people to be sold through a single lens. And that lens can also shape and can be like a self-fulfilling prophecy that, you know, um, shape the lives of queer people in that direction, that is in the direction of abuse and violence. So I try to challenge that. I try to document the history of non-heteronormativity and queerness. I try to understand how, queerness is even constructed and has been understood from like the pre-colonial times to through to the colonial times and today all across West Africa. And then I also try to document the everyday experiences of queer people, so different communities of queer people, not necessarily the LGBT community, but everybody that does not fall within heterosexuality, that is non-heteronormative. I try to document these things. So yeah, I consider my work very important. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
just like something. Mm.
No, thank you for that. And I think it is important, especially because right now we're seeing so many people say that, um, queerness was imported into Africa. Um, how do you feel about that? What is your response to people who feel like LGBTQ identities or queerness is something that was brought on by Europeans?
Yeah, it seems it's a very complex question, um, and I remember one of the things that got me very interested in this question. I was very young. I was in high school, mission high school, and they had then news had started coming up about queerness. I had also started struggling with my own queerness, and I would consistently hear that it is unnatural and it is foreign. But honey, I was born here. I grew up here. I had like at the time I had not really interacted with white people, but I was queer as fuck. And so you know, it really bothered me. But then also there was once again a real lack of material history on queerness that makes it very easy for people who come to Ghana across ethnicities. So I gathered all of these information, and every time someone tells me, "Oh, read, but this is it." Um, and I think it's pretty easy to say that queerness is un-African as a means to, claim some form of culture by the average Ghanaian. But it really is not. Um, there has been multiple work across not only Ghana, but Nigeria, Senegal, in the even up until the 2000 and 2008, Senegal was known as the gay capital of Africa. Um, all across Senegal, apart from the Wolof people, the Woudabe people that would travel around, a nomadic group that would travel from Senegal to Nigeria, placed a lot of emphasis on appearance culturally by their males. And so when the opposite, while like in Western culture, there is a lot more emphasis on women looking good and polishing their teeth, putting on makeup. Among the Woudabe, it is men who do this to attract women. And this bill criminalizes trans people who have been defined as on the Woudabe, their existence predates the existence of Senegal itself. African, or is it like the, you know, um, knowledge that people have been made to believe about queer, colonial, and rather on African?
Nice. Yeah, I think right now it's really important for people to hear these stories because on one hand they're saying that queerness is un-African, but then we're also seeing when these different African countries are enacting these anti-LGBTQ laws, then we're seeing these European nations who give funding or money or aid taking it away. So it's quite confusing on that aspect. Um, what do you think caused for this reason, particularly for Ghana? Because as you said, what I think is what's so interesting about one of the things you said before I asked that question, you said that you interviewed an 83-year-old trans woman. For her to be 83 years old, that means that she's older than the country. Because Ghana's only what, 69 years old. So I'm really curious how what do you think caused for there to be a urgency to enact this law or to pass this particular bill?
Wonderful. So there has been rising far right consensus against especially human rights. So that is one. This is to say, before I continue, that this is a very complicated story. Um, it is very easy for everybody to argue that it is because of colonialism, um, but we are far deep, once again, 69 years away from colonialism. And if people are still holds like the majority of Ghanaians still hold some form of bias and bigotry against Ghanaians, then like I think against queer Ghanaians, then I think that should be worrying. So while I would say definitely like if we want to trace it, then we can actually originally trace the criminal code that first criminalized queerness in Ghana, in Nigeria, in Sierra Leone, in India, to Great Britain, who introduced it in its colonies. In in Ghana, for instance, in 1869, right? Um, but then this same section has been adapted. It has not been changed. And in Ghana, for instance, in Nigeria, for instance, Maganda, we had the Kills Bill. Uh, Ghana in 2021, one resurfaced, which was not passed. And then in 2025 as well, a new one. I think what has been interesting about these bills is that they have been, I would say, in like, you could predict it in a way, you could predict them in a way because first of all, there has been an increased rise in the global far right movement in the USA, um, and the evangelical movement is very well known to fund global hate all around, globally, especially in Africa. But at the same time, too, some of the anti-rights groups in West Africa are also quite well funded by some of the embassies, the high commissions that, like the UK High Commission, fund some of them, while they also fund LGBT organizations at the same time. So that is also quite complicated. And then when you come locally as well, there are several actors who have several competing interests. Sadly, LGBT rights is a very popular way to mobilize public anger, um, and generally to organize, I would say, because I have worked as an organizer in the past. And this is to say that it's quite easy to meet different people who have different cultural backgrounds, different religious backgrounds. It is much easier to meet them in the intersection, on an intersectional consensus, and that is often an agreed hate towards the average queer person. So this makes it politically very appealing for politicians to use the LGBT community to garner votes. But also because the country is religious and it has a lot more religious people, it also makes it very convenient for the church as well. It makes it quite convenient for the church as well to weaponize its numbers to also m- misinformation and news fabrication to, generate public anger, generate public consensus, like by consensus, so that it could be introduced. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I remember back in 2022, I was in Ghana when the news broke out about I'm a governor. Um, and that was really a lot. Um, to see how she was one outed, and to see how even something as simple as having a nose ring was demonized as a reason, along with her being queer, as if those two things were equal. Um, and that being the reason why she was not able to, and I believe still to this day, was not able to go through her matriculation as a lawyer. When you saw that happen, what were your first thoughts?
Oh, that is when you mentioned I'm a governor's name. I just oohed because I remember I also wanted to go to law school. So I had bought my application form and I was in the process of applying when I saw the news. And I was like, oh no, because I was very openly queer, maybe even much more than Amagav now. Like I had a very large Twitter account and I was posting myself regularly with my partners. So everybody in Ghana knew that I was queer. And so I had to throw the form away. I think and yeah, just to correct you, she has been allowed to
Okay, cool.
matriculate now,
Okay.
and she is a lawyer, which is really incredible. Um, but I guess it was also very the entire point was not to only punish her alone, but for it to be a deterrent, to everybody who's young and queer or either interested in self-expression that you cannot, do that here and we would frustrate your life. And I think that is a very good adult thing. So yeah. But it was definitely interesting how it really I'm not sure I was the only one who was discouraged from doing my LB application, but I also I think it would have definitely been the number of people. And for me, I think even though Amma has been allowed to graduate now, they wasted 2 years of her life. And yeah, within those 3 years, most likely every single queer person that was open and was interested in pursuing law would not have, been able to do that. So once again, it really comes back to how homophobia really, like in institutions, um, it impacts like queer people.
Yeah, and it's also really interesting because I don't know, are you familiar with Dr. Polly Murray?
No.
So Dr. Polly Murray was an American non-binary person in the early 1940s and 30s, and um, they went to a variety of different schools, and I believe, also Howard, and they were the first woman to graduate in the class of law. And they actually was the first person to also be a part of writing with a team in Ghana. They went to Ghana to teach the first law class. Um, and yeah, Dr. Polly Murray, um, they identified as she throughout their life, but by the time that they um, passed, they didn't necessarily identify as they, them. We just do that now because, that language wasn't necessarily, um, given at the time. But they also coined the term Jane Crow, similar to like Jim Crow, but they coined that term to discuss the sexism that they experienced, particularly in academia. And so I always found that really interesting that Dr. Pauline Murray is a part of Ghana history. As a queer person, was a part of writing the first constitutional law book for teaching law classes in Ghana. And eventually they left the country and came back to America to actually become a priest. So that's just something to share. But back with I'm a governor, what I also thought was really interesting with that situation is also the way that um, her piercings and her tattoos were also scrutinized. Um, can you talk a little bit about how that intersection of how queer expression as well as with bodily expression go hand in hand somehow in Ghana court or in Ghana culture where it's not accepted, or what is that experience? Is it like a tribal experience? Like, is it based on different tribes or regions, or what would you say that history or that experience comes in when it comes to piercing and tattoos?
I think most of present day culture, or the things that we, not only Ghanaians but Africans in general, reclaim as, purely African, is not the purest. Um, and the refusal for us to critically interrogate that is creates a lot of problems for us. Because like when you go into history, tattoos are very African. Like last year, I worked on a project where we I met multiple women. I interviewed multiple women who culturally they use tattoos as self-identification with where they come from, their date of birth, because they were traders. So it had various use and significance for different cultures. Um, Sadly, you can say the same for piercings as well, right? But sadly, I think that the more religious the country becomes, the harder it looks down on its traditions. And so today, when people have tattoos, they are considered in a certain light, you know, much like how the Western gaze perceives people with tattoos. Even with your locked hair, your natural locked hair, like last up until 2024, there was a challenge in the courts in Ghana because a young man who had his natural hair wouldn't be allowed to attend his high school. And this is Ghana where everybody's hair, is like that. So I really think that MS um as aesthetics, if I can use this word, um really sat on the intersection of unsettling like a number of um, Ghanaian, the Ghanaian way of things. Like she is a woman. Sorry, also if I am not so certain if she is anymore, but then she identified as a woman and appeared as a woman, and already there was an element of sexism. She was also very outspoken, and those are already something that you cannot be if you are a woman. And she had piercings and she had tattoos and she openly said she was pansexual. So that really just um, put her on both challenging a lot of a number of intersections and also unsettling them. And yeah, it really did bring generate a lot of blowback, including what was obviously a loss of the schools not wanting her to graduate, I think, for 2 years.
Yeah, I remember that situation like so crazy. I was living in Cape Coast at the time, when I saw that story break out. And what was really frustrating for me, as a diasporan was that unfortunately a lot of the diaspora who live there also agree with the way that Ghana's handling that. And so I even found myself, so when we talk about what happened a few weeks ago with the with President Mahama at the UN hearing, to declare slavery the gravest crime against humanity, there was a lot of backlash, especially here in America. And there was a lot of backlash, on the continent, but also specifically in Ghana, where people were very confused how, the president could be fighting for this human rights violation while also pushing for an anti-human rights violation. When we were all watching that week-long experience of the UN hearing, what were some of the conversations that you were seeing, whether it was from queer communities in Ghana or non-queer communities? But what were some of your thoughts and what were some of the thoughts that you saw in the community?
I think I think there was a number of interesting responses, like especially because I am more in the Pan-African feminist communities. He has been receiving a lot of praise for, this is considered such a huge stride in Pan-Africanism. But also, I am here, like, I don't know about that, you know. And I think like a number of people have re-echoed the same sentiment. I don't know about that because, well, technically he's not the one that is pushing this anti-LGBT bill, but also you can follow right from the beginning of his campaign in 2020, when they wanted power for 2024. When you follow that, you realize that built he won votes using based on the promise that unlike his opponent, he was going to sign this anti-LGBT bill. And locally, he continues to indicate that he is going to sign the bill. And I mean, it is one thing to be a politician when you can say one thing while you do the other. But when it goes to an international level, when there are queer people who are also, educated, then I think we can all point out how much cognitive dissonance is in it because it is your political party regardless. And you have also campaigned on this. You have made promises about with this. So in office, can you really say that you don't support it? And also, how does it make sense to support this while also pushing for reparations, against the for the slave trade? I think it's interesting. Yeah.
But what I think is also interesting about this particular thing and what you're talking about is how there was a campaigning, because I was also in Ghana at this time. There was a campaigning using, the propaganda of, we're going to pass this bill, which is very similar to what happened here in America, simultaneously, literally at the same time, because our elections are at the same time. And so the same thing happened here. Our administration that we have today also campaigned on anti-LGBTQ rhetoric. So I just keep finding the contradictions and the hypocrisy so interesting because again, like I said earlier, you have the propaganda that's saying that to be LGBTQ is a Western thing, but as you stated, and as many people across the continent has stated, is that these identities have existed for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years and have been recorded. And there's traditional societies who have protected queer identities for centuries prior to European invasion. So I do think it's interesting that right now, particularly with America and with the continent, but particularly with Ghana, we're seeing a lot of the hypocrisy that I think without social media, it would be really difficult for us to kind of pinpoint the ways in which people are using propaganda. And I think right now, as biased as the information is, I am really glad that a lot of us are on social media telling our stories, sharing other people's stories, and also not just being defeated. I do want to ask you a question because I mentioned earlier about how, there is a Black diaspora presence in the country, along with, you know, um, non-Black diasporas, including, the Indians, the Lebanese, and all of that. But I'm really, really curious to know how does it make you feel, or if you've heard other people talk about how does it feel to know that an influx of potentially more homophobic people are coming into the country?
Hmm. That is an interesting question because there is also um there is also just the same chance that those people would not be homophobic. I guess I say this to say that it really does not change the material, you know, it does not change the material realities of queer people right now. I have lived in Ghana for a long time as um, an intersex and trans woman. And um, many of my friends, when I was growing up, they were sacked from school when I finished university and I started working. I faced a lot of housing insecurities and evictions, and I know so many people who did. I know so many people who faced discrimination. Um, that would not change with the influx of, you know, uh, more homophobic or less homophobic. If not, maybe it might make it worse. But I don't think it would change. And I also don't see how it changes anyway if those people, if they, even if they are queer, you know, because like in throughout, if there is anything that I have seen, it is that there is like a real lack of solidarity between the diaspora and queer LGBT community who come to Ghana and actual queer Ghanaians who live in Ghana, because oftentimes those people come with foreign accents and they come with an international passport and they come with an international currency. So they don't live the everyday realities of the everyday queer Ghanaian. They get to live in very expensive neighborhoods, shop at expensive places where it is safer to be queer, you know. So they live in a bubble. Everybody lives in a bubble. So like it really, whether they are less homophobic or more homophobic, I don't really see how that changes the material realities of queer people right now. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. Especially because I think that with this conversation with dual citizenship and dual political opportunity, I know that I've seen a few different commentary on that with the situation where they're trying to decide if people who hold dual citizenship can also hold office. And I've been seeing a lot of commentary on that, saying that, you know, a lot of people are hoping that, one, that particularly Black Americans are not a part of the opportunity to be in political office with that dual citizenship, because now, you know, the Black diaspora is a part of that community who is getting citizenship and things like that. So I get what you're saying in terms of it's not necessarily affecting the material reality for actual Ghanaians. But there is definitely, especially in a lot of these relocation seminars and in a lot of these conferences that are being held, it is very much so told to other diasporans that, you know, that the country doesn't condone that, and that if you are that, do not come here. And I mean, you can, you know, you can see other people say it all over YouTube.
The
Hmm.
rich queer people come here for vacations. Ricky Thompson,
Hmm.
the rich queer Ghanaians, they never sign anything that
Right.
is the celebration of queer Ghanaians. You consistently have like rich, very rich queer influencers, for instance, come to Ghana and stand at the Independence Square to take photos and then fly out of Ghana. And for like 2 months, there is a lot of attacks on queer Ghanaians when they did not go and kiss at the Independence Square, you know.
I
So
see what
once
you're saying.
again,
So
yeah, they,
there's more of a issue when, so like, are you talking about like similarly like when did you see that post a couple months ago when this couple, this queer Nigerian couple went to Nigeria, and then they made this video and they were like,
happened
you
in
know what I'm talking
Nigeria.
about? And they were like, oh, there's all of these secret clubs and blah blah blah. And people were like, why would you do that?
Yeah, so it happened in Ghana before it happened in Nigeria, and it's in fact not the first time it's happened. Like we have critiqued this for at least 5 years now because of how when you think about the power imbalance and the risk and the situation, and it's all usually just for clout and for them to feel that, oh, I am criminalized here, but I am not criminalized here. It's a very nasty thing. This scholar, Jacques Depois, he calls it homo nationalism. Depois
Okay.
calls this homo nationalism, where sexual rights, freedom, are given through citizenship and are people who feel like they have rights now and are human. gets to show this in the faces of, us who are not human, so much human. Um, but yeah, it's very nasty, and I have personally been critiquing it. I have said it in front of some of them, their faces, and it did not go down so well with them. I knew some of them that we don't know each other anymore because I am quite confrontational. So, but yeah, yeah.
So I get what you're saying because I've seen that backlash as well. So that's interesting. So there's a more material effect than from actual queer Africans in the diaspora who come and visit to the country more than there are for people who may be against it because like you said, the people who are against it aren't necessarily in your spaces or they're not, powerful enough and mostly not rich enough to even make commentary on it. But the people who do have money, especially particularly influencers, who do come into the country and they're able to flaunt it and do things that you guys would be penalized for or literally arrested for, not just, social media commentary, but the actual issue, like the actual physical experience that you would have to go through. They wouldn't have to go through because they are being protected by their passport or their accents, like you're saying, and then additionally money. That's really interesting. What do you think, like, what would be a solution for that? How should queer people in the diaspora, particularly people who are directly tied to the continent, first, second generation, what would be a proper way to experience the countries without um, kind of affecting or flaunting their freedom towards people who are in the country who can't do the same thing?
There is a lot of reflections to be made. I think it's important that all of us, the power that we have, sometimes when we are in one country, the power dynamic is not the same as when we move from that country to a different country. And I think a lot of times people forget that just because I was a minority here and I experienced racism, um, then when I go to another country, I still have the same or I still experience the same kind of violence, and I completely cannot also reproduce other kinds of violence. I think I think we need to start our reflection from there. And then we can talk about allyship and how it looks like, you know, because also obviously Ghanaian queer people cannot prevent those in the diaspora to have an experience, to have a cultural experience. But at the same time, how does it synchronize with how do the two synchronize such that while diasporans get to have like a cultural experience of queerness, it is also done in a respectful way that in fact advances the cause of queer people and does not like set them back, you know. I guess these are all questions that we we should all be asking ourselves, especially those of us who are interested and care about having this form of dialogue.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Even outside of this particular topic, I think that the diaspora and the local community should be having a lot more conversations on exactly what you're talking about, on how we can make sure that we are not harming each other, whether subconsciously or consciously, um, given the different freedoms that we all have, right? Because there's certain freedoms that diasporans don't have in Ghana and vice versa. Um, is there any last words that you want to share? Anything about your project that you want to share before we hop off?
I think we have our Queer Elders Speak podcast coming up next month.
Okay.
So I'm really excited about that. If anyone would like to check it out, I will share the link with you. Yeah, when it's
Yeah,
coming.
for sure. I'll put it in the description box.
Ah, thank you.
Okay, Madasi Pa, I will.
You are welcome. I'll call back. Oh, back here.